I think some of the stuff. Who's talking?
The lady on the machine.
I'll just carry on. Okay. So I'm going to be starting with just the anatomy and biomechanics of the ankle. And we brought along, what do we call this? Frankie. So if you want a closer look just now at Frankie, or we can actually pass around while we're doing the anatomy, we can start there. You can see it's not a real foot, don't worry. It's a plastic one. So don't get freaked out. But as you can see, the ankle is very complicated. It's just, if you can compare it to your wrist, made up of lots of different bones and ligaments that hold it together. But I think the big thing to point out about the ankle, it's your basic support. So when things go wrong with the foot and the ankle, it actually can affect the whole body. And I think I've seen most people's presentations, we're all going to say that, we're going to mention that, because that is just so important. And I'm going to bring that into my talk as well, because it involves everything. Okay. The main thing about the foot is it's a shock absorber. So you can imagine, even those people that barefoot run, or if you run with shoes, your ankle takes the force of your whole body times a few if you're running. So it has to be a very, very good shock absorber. It also aids in your mobility, because you're able to stand on one foot, and your ankle and your foot actually helps you to stand on that. So if you just remember those, that's the main thing. So that's can you see fasting now? So that's actually how to stand there. Okay, so this is the foot. It's made of 3 systems. The first one I'm going to talk about is obviously the tacit system, which is your bones and ligaments. So what holds the foot together if there's no muscle or no movement going on, if the foot will still, like Frankie over there, it still holds its form because of the anatomy bones and ligaments around it. So just in simple terms, you obviously have your, what makes up, we call them malleoli, but the ankle bones, which is your shin, your tibia, and your fibula on the side. And then all the bones of the ankles, so you have your calcaneus, which is your heel, the talus, which is the bone that sits on top of that. And in front of it, you've got your navicular. It's probably all going there, but I'm going to mention them anyway. Your 3 cuneiforms and your cuboid bone. Then when you get to what everybody always thinks, oh, those are already the toes. So those are your metatarsals. All those parallel bones are the metatarsals. And then your phalanges, which is equivalent to your fingers, the little toes at the end of it. Your ligaments then attach everything together. So on the inside of the ankle is your deltoid ligament, but that's a very strong one. You hardly ever hear of somebody spraining their ankle where it went inwards. So it's very, very strong, not very common for you to sprain that one. But these ones on the outside, you always hear, oh, I've sprained my ankle, and it's usually those ones on the outside of the ankle that you manage to sprain. And then, of course, you've got your joint capsule. So your capsule is basically a fibrous tissue that holds the joint together. Okay. The arches of the foot, which I think is probably all going into a little bit of detail about the arches of the foot, but I just wanted to bring to you, there's 3 arches. So your inner arch, that's the one that most of you know, that gives you that form of your foot, and that's the one that generally collapses when you've got a collapsed arch. Your transverse arch is basically from the big toe side to the baby toe side, over that way, and then your lateral one, so that's the outer arch. So by your baby toe side of the foot is your lateral arch. And most time, like I say, your support comes underneath the foot. I'll come back to that. Your active system is obviously then your muscles and tendons. So your ligaments hold bone to bone, and your tendon holds the muscle to the bone. Okay, I'm just going to highlight a few of them because the other ladies will be going into more details about the injuries of that. So most people know your calf, which is made out of your gastroc and your soleus, which is then attached onto your Achilles tendon. So you'll see your Achilles tendon at the back here, and that is the calf attaching onto it. So this is where we have a lot of problems with the foot, is the Achilles tendon. And I'll show you another one just now at the bottom of the foot, which is your plantar fascia anterior. Then the most common tendon that we have trouble with is your peroneal, which is at the back here on the outer bit of it. One thing I want to point out is you see how each of the toes has its own little tendon to lift it up. And on the next slide, look underneath the foot, each of the toes has its own little tendon again. So again, it's like your hand. Each one of your toes should be able to move individually. And I think is Barbara coming up into that a little bit. Most people can't. I'm like, I can't move my toes. And when I start with an ankle patient, I'm saying, okay, this is what you should be able to do. Like, it doesn't move. But after a lot of practice, you can actually get them to move. They each have their own little tendon. And your big toe is obviously your most important one. And he has an extra little tendon. So it's, again, individually controlled. At the bottom of the foot, that is your plantar fascia. Okay, so it's actually being cut away. But that is the connective tissue that basically goes underneath the whole foot. And you'll see everybody's going to talk about the plantar fascia as well. So just to highlight where it actually is in the foot. And why I showed both these diagrams with the neural system. So where we can see on the right-hand side, that's your sciatic nerve. It comes from your spine all the way down the back of the leg. At the back of the knee, then it splits into two, okay? The one curls around the front and the other one goes down the back. So you can see any sort of nerve problems. Is it a back problem or is it a foot problem? So just think of that in the back of your mind as well. And then coming down into the foot itself, this one is shown particularly just on the inner side and underneath the foot, but it's a complicated system. And why it's important, footwear-wise, to look after your feet, because are you pinching a nerve? Have you got pins and needles? What is actually going on there? But the neural system is very, very complicated. We won't go into too much detail, but I'm sure you'll have more questions. I want to just highlight the heel as well, because that heel pad that is shown there. So it's a fibrocartilage, fibroelastic is the word I'm looking for, rich in blood and nerve supply. So can you imagine if you have an injury when you fall onto that heel, you hurt the calcaneus, maybe it's not even broken, but it's actually bruised under there. Why it takes a long time to heal. And through time, through years, that cushion, you lose that cushion. So you need more padding. So when you run around barefoot or you're walking around on a tiled floor barefoot, it can actually cause quite a lot of pain. But it's because that flat pad actually decreases in height through time. Okay? But why I want to show you this slide as well, you can see at the back, the Achilles tendon comes into the heel and the plantar fascia comes into the heel from the other side. So they are actually connected with that heel. So that connects our system from the bottom of the foot to the back of the leg. And as I'll show you on the next slide, this is what we call the posterior chain. Now, these are all the muscles, literally from your lower back, which is your thoracolumbar fascia, it's a connective tissue, over your glutes. That then extends over your hamstring, your calf, your Achilles tendon, under the foot, your plantar fascia. So if you've got a back problem, I'm often not surprised when somebody says, I've got a lot of tightness in my hamstring. I'm always getting cramping in my calf. I've got a pain at the bottom of the foot. So sometimes my feet people, they say, since I've had the foot pain, I've actually got a little bit of a sore back as well. So I don't look at them and think that that's gone a bit nutty. It is all connected. So don't forget that as well. All right. Biomechanics is very complicated. So your biomechanics is basically how does the foot move to propel us, and how do all those bones that I mentioned, all the muscles, all the tendons, how do they all work together to propel us forwards? So I can't go into those details now. What did you say, Melanie? That's a 3-day talk.
That's 3 months. You'd have to sleep now.
So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'll just whiz a little bit because I think each person is going to go a little bit into the biomechanics as well. But think of the foot as half a dome. Okay. For some people, when you've got a flat foot, sorry, you've lost the dome. But think of the half a dome. Okay. And exactly like I've said in there, it's a complex structure and function. When I talk about the hind foot, that's kind of the back side of the foot where the leg runs into the foot. So that's the hind foot. That's fairly rigid. You don't get too much in that area. And the forefoot, so that's where I said the metatarsals, so those long finger-like bones that you saw on the first slide, and into the toes. That's more mobile. So everybody's probably going to go through that with regards to the exercises and that. But that's the part of the foot that you can really move and the toes that you can move. But it's a combination of the stiff backside, the hind foot, and the mobile forefoot that they have to work together. Otherwise, you're going to either end up with pain or you aren't able to run or move or walk properly. Movements of the foot. Basically, what we call dorsiflexion is bringing your foot backwards. Plantar flexion is pointing your toes. Inversion is the sole coming in. And as you can see, just with that movement, the foot coming in, everything's moving to get that action. And then the foot going outwards is eversion. So, like I said, lots of fancy words, don't worry about them. And then just to complicate things, we talk about open chain and closed chain. Now, open chain is what I've just done now, moving the foot in air. But when you stand on the foot, that's closed chain, and the whole biomechanics actually changes once again. 3-month course, yes. Just to give you a quick overview. I want to point out that's a nice diagram there. So we're going into a bit of science there. Physics. The plantar fascia is basically this bit here. And you can see in the diagram, there's the plantar fascia. But when you lift up the big toe, remember I said everything's connected. So now we've lifted up the big toe, and that's pulled everything this way. So what's going to happen? The arch has to lift up. If you have a chronic tight plantar fascia, it actually forces the arch up. And I often see patients that have this. They have protrusions of the body at the top of their foot. And a lot of people feel that. So that's because your plantar fascia chronically has become too tight. So that's why a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about, the lovely spiky balls and stuff, are important to make sure you've got that flexibility. But if you don't have that flexibility, you lose out on this mechanism, because we need that mechanism to be able to propel yourself forwards. So I've mentioned the 3 phases. So the swing phase is obviously as you bring your foot through, you're going to lift the big toe up. And that already tensions, so that when you place your foot down, which is then the foot flat stance phase, now you're weight bearing on it, which gets you then ready for the propulsion forwards. Now you're on that diagram there, you're on your toe, and you've got that energy to then push off from that dome that is now being raised up, and you're ready to propel yourself forwards. So don't forget about the Achilles tendon and your calf at the back. That will store the energy as you come through onto that toe off phase to then propel you forwards. Okay, and obviously the rate at which you do that depends on how much stored up energy you have to propel you forwards. But if you don't have all the movement on the foot or the ligaments, you're going to find the propulsion forward very, very difficult. Okay. Here's your questions. That is a basic overview of the anatomy. Everybody looks stunned. Now we're going to go on to the next lot, which is more the problems that go wrong. Oh, yeah. Now we're already finished. Thank you. You can leave it. Feeling good. I need to check. Can you maybe move? Look in the way. Can you see around me? Sorry, was that Renee? Hi everybody, so I'm Renee, for those who don't know me. I'm a physiotherapist and I work with Diane. So my portion is what can go wrong. Don't know what I want to start. Okay, so let's dive right in. Firstly, progressive foot, or it's actually progressive collapsing foot deformity. But I didn't like the word collapsing. It sounds very terminal. So anyway, but it is something that can happen as we age. There can be different reasons. So it can be arthritis. It can be if you do high impact sports. If you wear non-supportive footwear, and there's a genetic component as well. But the biggest cause that they have found is actually tibialis posterior tendon problem. So if you go back to the anatomy, the green line, that's your tibialis posterior. So the function of that is to actually lift the arch. So it's a little bit maybe of a chicken and an egg, because you start with a tendon problem. It can sometimes even be a tear or inflammation, and that makes it weaker, so the arch will naturally drop. And as the arch drops, it puts more strain on the tendon. So that's what I mean, it's a vicious cycle. But it's just another picture where you can see the feet. But anyway, so that's again where your exercise comes in, and why it's so important to keep strong and to exercise, as Tammy will go into more detail later on. So that's just a nice picture to show you. At the top, there's a normal arch, and at the bottom, when you have a collapsed arch, you can see it also makes this, what's the phrase, snowball effect almost, and it has other effects on maybe causing a bunion, maybe even having straw toes, and that's the big toe, they call it a hammer toe. And yeah, so it's quite important to keep our arches healthy. And again, it's like it carries you through life. So it's very important. You can't go walking on your hands. Some people can. Anyway, and then so there are 2 stages. The one is a flexible stage, and then the other one where you can still change it. So you can still move it. It's more like a dynamic flattening of the arch, and with strengthening of the intrinsic foot muscles, so those deep muscles that is almost like a suctioning of the arch of the foot. You can actually improve it, or by wearing in like orthotics or some supportive footwear, and strengthening is really your big thing. So you can still change it, but then as we get older, it can become rigid. So then there's nothing you can do about it anymore. And some people end up needing surgery where they actually fuse those foot bones, or even the ankle in sometimes. So because sometimes when the arch collapses, it has an effect on the ankle bone. You can even cause ankle impingements, and so it can get quite bad if you're not if you don't do something to it early. So that's really what we're all here for, is more prevention, right? So anyway, there's that. And this is also a nice picture of what Diane was talking about, how you can see the effect that it has on the rest of the body. So if we have this flat arch, if you can see the view from the back, then you're going to have more strain on the inside of the knee. You're going to have a squat hip, and your whole spine is going to be skewed. And so it really, again, it can become, you can get all sorts of funny problems, and actually it can be on the feet. So the feet is where everything starts, and yeah, it's very important. Okay, next one, bunions. So bunion is, let me just get the right word, painful bony bump. So you can see there where they've marked it as a prominence. So it's a painful bony bump at the metatarsal phalangeal joint. So it's where that metatarsal comes together with the little phalanges, the little toes, and it's actually the big toe that shifts towards the other toe. So you can see the healthy foot on the other side. And when the orthopedic surgeons look at it, they measure the angle of the metatarsals. So the biggest thing with bunions is footwear. So there's so many things we can do to prevent all of these things from happening.
So wearing shoes that are too narrow and also wearing high heels a lot. So too narrow shoes are, so a lot of our shoes are way too narrow for our feet. So to get appropriate footwear is so important. What else did I want to say? All right. So, this is what I want to say. So, if you take away a lot of the layers of the foot muscles, you can see your adductor. So, adduct means to bring together, and your abductor on the other side. Abduct to take away. So, a lot of the times, if you think back to this slide, you can think that the adductors, the one that take it together, are quite strong and stiff, and the abductors become stretched and weak. So if you just think where you're sitting now in your shoes, can you take your big toe outwards towards your shoe? Not a lot of us can actually move our big toes in that direction. So it becomes quite, so the abductor, the one taking it outwards, become weak. And that's another thing, another part of rehab, if we start strengthening it, is to strengthen. So it's stuff that we can do before you need an operation, or to possibly even avoid an operation. So to strengthen that big toe abductor and to just migrate the toe the other way again. And we can change it. I've changed it in myself. So you can with your exercises. And then another thing with bunions as well is big toe extension. So if you think back about the biomechanics, to be able to lift your big toe, and if you have this toe that's all squashed, it makes it hard. So to have a normal walking pattern. So it all plays into each other again. All right, so next we've got forefoot pain. So we've got two conditions here that I just want to quickly talk about. So Morton's neuroma and a synovitis of the also metatarsophalangeal joint. So this often we present with pain at the pad of the foot. It can even cause burning or numbness into the toes and that type of thing. So what a Morton's neuroma is, it's a thickening of the nerve. So it's not a true neuroma like a sort of an outgrowth of the nerve. It's more an inflammation of the nerves, and often between the third and the fourth toe. And that can be quite painful. So for this, and the synovitis is the inflammation of the capsule. So like Diane was saying, there's a capsule around each joint, and it can become inflamed. And again, the causes can be incorrect footwear, like high impact sports, like tennis, that type of thing, and not wearing cushion shoes. So stuff that we would do, the first thing we would do is to offload the area. So we just added a cushion and ice, that type of thing, and then also to mobilize. But anyway, if this doesn't work, then eventually you might need a cortisone injection or some medication, but it can be solved. All right, and then I also just quickly want to talk about ankle injuries. So like Diane also mentioned, it's more common to have damage to the outside ligaments of the ankle, and oftentimes it's a sprain, like that picture shows. We call it an inversion injury. So it's when the ankle goes excessive in that direction into inversion, and then you can tear it because it places too much strain on that ligament. The ligaments are rigid. They're not meant to move. They're not like a muscle that you can stretch. They provide your passive support. So we can grade the ligaments or the sprains into different grades. So if you think about it, grade 1 is just a little tear. Grade 2 is a big tear, and grade 3 is a complete tear. And then we have different protocols for the different grades. But usually what we do initially is to treat the pain. We get the joint moving again. We can treat the hematoma, the bruising, and then we will gradually, as the injury improves, we can start the strengthening and the rehab. And another thing that I just want to mention with the ankle injuries, what sometimes or mostly often gets injured is the little nerve endings that tells your body what your position in space is. So those are your proprioceptors. So they are the little nerve endings that every time you take a step, or if you're on an uneven surface, they tell the muscles on the outside, oh, contract a little bit more so you don't go into that excessive inversion. And I think Tavi to talk about that a little bit further. Yeah, so there's that. Oh, another thing that can happen, actually, to go back quickly to the ankle injuries, is that if it's not rehabilitated properly, it can turn into a chronic problem. So then they sometimes call it the problem ankle. Because what can also happen, if you think back to the anatomy, is this the outside. Here we've got our ligaments, and then we have our peroneal tendons, sorry. We have our peroneal tendons. So they can often also become injured when we have an ankle injury, and they can become like tendonitis. So it's not a true inflammation of the tendon, but it's an inflammation-like process that does happen. So then it can become sort of a chronic problem. Yeah, so you can develop tendinopathies of the peroneus on the outside, and also then of the tibialis on the inside that I mentioned earlier. And that's mainly due to overuse. So doing too much too soon, not enough resting, not doing anything the whole year, and then suddenly you go on a 5-day hike, those types of things. So also they are preventable, and they're also treatable. So the biggest one that I wanted to talk about here is an Achilles tendinopathy. So the Achilles, as you know, is the one at the back, and that we see quite often as well. We say in weekend warriors, so people who don't do anything the whole week, and then they play 4 hours of tennis on the weekend or something like that, or they go run a marathon every weekend or whatever they do. And so again, it's overuse and misuse. So not correct grading of your exercise, or doing something you shouldn't be doing. And then also it's got different phases. So initially it's a tendonitis, so an inflammation-like process. And that's your body's natural healing response, but that can cause swelling and pain and that type of thing. But then if you don't nip it in the bud, if you don't have it looked at early, or start your rehab or start your treatment early, you can actually have changes in the collagen fibers, and that's what they say, the degeneration in the tendon. And then it's usually a much longer and much more difficult process, and that can actually lead to tears eventually. So all of these things, it's very important to treat it quickly or as soon as possible. Another thing that I wanted to mention with tendinopathies is oftentimes it's tight muscles that can put more strain on the tendon. So also that's where physio can help to release the muscles, or to help you how to stretch it, and we can also help you how to grade the exercises and pass you on to where you need to be passed on to. And then which brings us to plantar fasciitis. So it's also something that can happen with the collapsing arches. So when your arch is flattened, it can put more strain on the plantar fascia, that thick connective tissue underneath the foot. And also, funnily enough, in people that were born with very high arches, that can also lead to plantar fasciitis. So other risk factors are, I can't read my own handwriting, also repetitive high impact activity, prolonged standing, flat feet to high arches, like I said, and tight calf muscles. And so your plantar fasciitis is really when there's too much tension on the calcaneus here, where the plantar fascia attaches. So it can sometimes even like cause a lot of inflammation in the bony membrane. So it can be quite painful, and how it presents is often in morning pain. So pain that first few steps that you take, it's like a burning on the inside of the heel. So the treatment for that would start also first with just treating the symptoms. So a nice massage with ice, getting some pressure off, maybe some insoles temporarily, and then also to mobilize the foot, to stretch what needs to be stretched and to strengthen what needs to be strengthened. That's what I wanted to say there. Okay, so what can physiotherapy do to help? I've mentioned all of this before, but I will mention it again. So I brought my little, this is actually also something that can help for plantar fasciitis and for Achilles tendinopathy. Sometimes we will recommend a heel raise just to take a bit of pressure off the Achilles tendon, so it's not in such a long, lengthened position. These I think I got from Take-A-Lot, but you can get it from any pharmacy or clinic or anything, so they're quite nice for a lot of foot issues. Yeah, so what can we do? Strapping. So strapping, the pictures that I've got here are for the acute, more for acute ankle injuries. So those pretty, what do you call it? Tentacles. Okay. That helps a lot for bruising, hematoma, swelling. It's quite amazing if you've ever seen it working. So that's quite a nice application and use of the strapping. So again, if you heard something, to get it looked at sooner, that helps a lot because swelling can prevent healing. So we want to address the swelling as quickly as possible. And then the one to the right is a rigid strapping that we would use to protect the ligaments that have been sprained. And then here I've got an interesting picture of what we can do for something like an Achilles tendinopathy, so we can offload the tendon a little bit. The stripes at the bottom they can use for your plantar fasciitis, and then the black one, or maybe something similar, we can use for collapsing arches to give it just a little bit of extra support to give you time to get stronger while you do your exercise and start your rehab. We can also do myofascial release, so that's just a fancy word for saying muscles and connective tissue mobilization, and then also joint mobilization to get the foot to move the way it needs to move, give it your mobility back, and then exercise. Well, that's a cute little gift. So exercise is really, it's been proven, it's the single best thing you can do for your health, for every part of your health, your heart, your bone density, your mind, literally everything. So, and in this case as well, as you've heard us all me say, us say a lot, exercise is really the part of the treatment, or an important part of the treatment for everything. So it's so important. And then other little things that you can use. So in bunions especially, I've got these little toe spacers that are quite cool, so it can help prevent your toes from migrating. So those are quite cool, and these are also got from Take-A-Lot. And your spiky balls, my favorite. And your spiky balls you can use also for self-massage and self-management of pain. I think they're torture, but anyway. And then I just want to talk about footwear as well. It's so important. So you can see the picture at the bottom, the effect of high heels on the feet. And then on the left, you can see the difference in toe splay in a barefoot shoe or a shoe with a wide toe box, what they talk about, and a regular shoe. But can you see how the regular shoe, it's almost like you want to give yourself bunion. So to look at, if you're looking at a shoe, you want to look at mobility. So you want to actually see, can it flex? Or is it going to be like I'm walking on splits? You know, you want to actually be able to have that proper gait and lift the toe, get the toe off, and actually go through the proper pattern. Otherwise, your muscles are going to deteriorate and they are going to get stiff and tight. And then cushioning. So to get a nice soft shoe with nice arch support, it's also part of the treatment for a lot of the conditions that I've mentioned. And it can help a lot if you have to stand a lot or just to take you through life. And I quite like New Balance because they also have a wide option. There are other nice brands like Skechers. I like the barefoot shoes, the Vivos and the Ultras as well. Ultras also have cushioning, so everyone also has a preference. But yeah, as long as they're wide, they're cushioned, and you can actually move in them, those are good shoes. Any other anyway, shoe brands? And that's me now there. Everybody needs to stand up and move a little bit. To get the circulation going.
Yeah.
Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Tamlyn and I'm a biokineticist. So I'm just going to walk you through what we do on our side for all the different foot injuries and pathologies that you get. I'm going to briefly go through some exercise ideas. Bearing in mind, some of them are going to look quite complicated, but we don't do all of these with everybody. It's very individualized. I'll get into a bit more detail about that now. All right, so just on what's on the agenda, biokinetics is a bit of a scary word. I know a lot of people don't know what it is, so I'm just going to go through what we actually do. What we actually do briefly in our assessments, and of course the exercises for the different injuries that have been mentioned. All right, so if we break biokinetics up, bio meaning life, kinetics, movement. So if we put it together, life through movement. So we basically are the final phase of rehabilitation where we focus on exercise and movements to promote strength, stability, and mobility. So the one thing that will help with is preventing a loss of movement, preventing the possibility of future or recurrent injuries or them happening again, and to improve the physical well-being and independence. All right. So with our assessment, that basically gives us a plan of care that identifies what the needs of the individual is. So if somebody comes in and they have got Morton's neuroma, we're not going to treat them the same as somebody that might have fallen off, because we look at everything from the foot all the way up to the neck, and everybody else is different. And of course, based on that, how are we going to treat them? What movements are we going to do? What muscles are we going to target? Everybody's rehab plan is going to be different. It's never a general, that's not how I work. I don't work on a generalized program. I literally tailor it according to what your body actually needs. So the different things that we look at in the assessment is a history. So I get a really quite a complex history. I look at any of your medical conditions, any injuries that you've maybe had in the past, what you're currently feeling, activities you're doing, because that gives me a bit of a story as to what I need to look for. You know, someone, I don't just look at the foot. I'll look at, well, have you had a back injury in the past? Has your hip been giving you problems? What's going on with the knees? So that already gives me about 90% of what I need to know so that I can carry it on from there. Then we look at posture. Renee showed you a really nice picture. I've actually got a similar one, looking at the kinetic chain, how the foot affects the whole way up the body. Strength and flexibility. So we need to see what we need to strengthen, what we need to actually provide flexibility and movement for. And then gait, which includes your walking. So especially with the ankle, I like looking at the gaits. I like looking at the different stance phases of your propulsion, your stance, your actual walking. How is your body moving? What is maybe compensating to perform those movements? What do we actually need to do to fix it and help you? So this is my favorite picture, very similar to what Renee showed you. Balanced posture versus an imbalanced posture. So you can actually see how amazing it is. If we've got a collapsed arch, our knee rotates inwards, maybe a bit of knee pain. And then of course our pelvis tilts down. So you can actually see perfect alignment. I haven't seen that working at all. I don't think there is a perfect body on this planet, but that's what we try and aim for. So it's really important not just to isolate the area that you may be having pain in. It could be coming from somewhere else. And we want to try and get that under control so you don't land up having problems elsewhere. Okay. All right. Sorry, don't look so great in these pictures. But these are a couple of examples of functional assessment. So functional is so important. Our body acts as a whole. We don't just use, we don't just use this finger. We use our whole arm to lift. We pick things up. So these are just a few examples of things that I look at. So I look at, can the person do the movement? If they can't do the movement, I'm not going to be able to test the strength. So I also look at what are they doing to maybe compensate for that movement? Are they lowering down and sitting on one bum cheek first? Are they lifting their toes as they stand up? All of these things give me a good idea of the biomechanics and how the body's actually moving. Single leg balance, we're never going to be standing on both legs. When we're walking, we're transferring our weight to one leg. So that's also really, really important. How are you loading the body? What is the foot and knee doing? Hip as well. And then, of course, calf raise or a single leg calf raise. If somebody can't raise up their heels with both feet, I'm not going to get them to have to do it on one foot. But this is obviously just an example of something functionally that we do. So when we're walking, we're obviously pushing off through the toes over here. So it's just mimicking some of the motions that we go through on a daily basis. All right, just quickly range of movement. So this is a really nice test that I do with people to assess dorsiflexion, which is the upward movement of the foot and the ankle, because that's super, super important for the normal performance of functional activities like your walking, your running, your stair climbing, getting up from a chair and squatting. So going to the bathroom, you don't have that range of motion, you're going to battle with just tasks that are really, really important in everyday life. Even if you do, we want to prevent that kind of stuff from progressing. So if you've got problems with the hip, might be going down the chain, limiting you on later on in life. So it's also preventative maintenance as well that we look at. All right, and then we're going on to the exercises for the foot. Apologies in advance, I didn't bring the right cable, so my videos might not work because I've had to change over to Mac. But if the videos don't play and you guys are keen to see, you're more than welcome to come afterwards and just give you a little bit of a play there. All right, so looking at collapsed arches. So Renee mentioned really, really nicely there, we need the strength of our tibialis posterior to actually lift the arch, allow it not to walk and allow the knee to collapse inwards. So I've got a really nice example over here where the mouse is hovering over. I'm actually putting a band around my ankles and I'm pushing outwards so that I lift the arch and I'm engaging the muscles on the outside of the leg here so that I don't have this collapse inwards and I'm helping my foot. So we're offloading the foot a little bit there. And then of course we've got this one. These are toe splays. I know you probably can't see too well. Sorry about my toes. But these are the toe splays. This is what Renee was speaking about for the bunions, to actually use your big toe and separate the feet. If you can ground through your big toe, your base of support improves twofold and your arch actually lifts. So you can try it if you put your foot down and you actually push and engage through your big toe, your arch automatically lifts. So that's something to bring awareness and strength. And then we have got this one, not the greatest video for you guys to maybe see, but I'm actually pushing my big toe down into an elastic. So what I'm doing there is I'm actually engaging and I'm strengthening the big toe so that I know how to use it and strengthen it. Because it's one thing just trying to work through the toe. If you don't have the strength to do it, you're going to battle. All right. All right, and then we go to the bunions. So that is where your big toe comes towards the second digit over here. So videos are starting to play. So you'll see in the first video over there, I'm actually moving my toe. If you can't lift your toe, you're not going to be able to get it outwards. So we need to provide mobility there so that we can actually get strength going as well. What I'm also doing here now is you'll see I plant my foot down and I actually turn my foot out to keep my big toe away from my second toe. And then from there, I'm actually loading my calf in the correct foot position. So I'm teaching my body how to engage to the toe and actually load the muscle at the back of the leg, which is going to support us properly with the big toe apart. Yeah, and of course, you know, the big thing about keeping the big toe apart is to find the balance between, mentioned earlier, abduction outwards and adduction inwards. So the big toe is abducting and coming towards the second toe. We want to strengthen it to pull it out and obviously mobilize it or provide stability so that we can lift it up and take it out. So adduction is not so common. And then of course with all of this, I'm obviously not mentioning glutes and hamstrings, but the rest of the kinetic chain is super important. Okay, so bear that in mind. We're not obviously just going to look at this. We'll bring in glutes and all sorts depending on what the person actually needs. Okay, and then Morton's neuroma. So what tends to happen here, it can happen during the phase of stance where you propel off. So as I am going to step forwards here, I'm either loading outside or putting more weight on the outside of my foot, or on the 2 digits, the big toe and the little toe. This usually happens between the 3rd and 4th toe. So what happens is if you're not using your big toe, you are constantly pressing on the outside of your foot, you're going to keep irritating that structure over there. So what we try and do, and in the first picture, I don't know if it's, or video, I don't know if it's, no, I don't think it's going to play, but what we do in this video over here is I actually attach a band to a structure. I put it underneath the big toe. And as I step forward, if I lift, the inside of my foot and the band disappears, you know that you're overloading the outside of the foot. So that brings awareness, plus it forces you to push your big toe down and little and second toe so that you actually strengthen the right muscles and offload or take pressure off the outside of the foot where you might be using it too much. And then of course you have got 2 gastrocnemius or calf muscles. Your medial, which is on the inside of the leg, and then the lateral, which is on the outside. Your medial gastrocnemius, we need to stretch, and we put it on stretch by lifting the toes slightly and then turning the feet inwards. So you look like you'd be a little bit pigeon-toed over here, and you just get the stretch in there, just loosen up the structures, take the pressure off there as well. Okay, so Renee mentioned proprioception earlier. That is those little nerve endings that tell you where your body is in space. And, oh, we need to contract here more. Oh, the leg is going in this way. So I've put the first 2 videos are actually quite cool with the proprioception. The first one strengthens the foot. It's not playing now, but I'm on a wobble board and I'm basically going into inversion, foot going inwards, and eversion, foot going outwards. So I'm training my muscle how to maintain stability and strength while I'm putting it into these compromised positions. Because of course inversion injuries are where we turn the ankle out, so we need the strength of the peroneals, the muscles on the outside, to keep us from actually doing that and help us bounce back actually. And then the proprioception of being on a balance pad, not only is it super challenging, you're going to feel your foot start to cramp, so the intrinsic deep muscles get strengthened, and of course you get feedback of where your body is in space, trying to correct it, trying to stay as perfect environment as possible. And then you've got this exercise, the 3rd one over here. I tie the TheraBand to my foot, and what I'm actually doing is I'm going into plant-off flexion. So I'm pushing my toe downwards and working outwards. So this is mimicking the motion of what you might actually experience when you twist the ankle. So this is strengthening those muscles in that position so that we try and avoid it. Okay, so again, peroneals. Right. Okay, and then plantar fasciitis. So we need to train our toe flexors, which are muscles that pull our toe upwards, and not pull our point our toes, pull downwards. Sorry, extensors are going upwards. So we need to train those in the peroneal muscles in a lengthened position. So how we do that is we put them on stretch and we load them. So don't know if you can see very well here, but I've placed a towel. And I've actually perched my toes up, so they're actually lifted up. And then from there, I'm actually loading my plantar fascia safely, but also working my calves at the same time to support. So we're not just doing it individually, we're doing it as a whole structure. Of course, we need to stretch the plantar fascia. So the nice thing I was mentioned earlier is rolling on the ball for the feet. I think that's going to be covered a bit later. And we can put the foot into a position where we actually stretch the plantar fascia and we stretch the muscles around. So we can strengthen it and we can stretch it with the muscles together. Okay. All right. Wish these videos could play, it would be a bit more interesting. Okay, so the Achilles tendinopathy. So the first video might look quite daunting. Is quite a bit more of a complex one, but like I said, it's tailored to everybody. Always make it easier, always make it harder. So the Achilles is an elastic structure, and we need to be able to load it in order for it to get strong and train the spring of the tendon, because we lose that. Especially if you've got a rupture, we need to retrain the body and train that actual tendon. So what we actually do here is we can do a single leg soleus raise, and your soleus is just at the bottom here, and it goes into the Achilles over here. So it's just at the bottom over here. We can load that and working in all the way up and all the way down. So you're actually getting into the tendon as well as the muscle. Okay, so it's a full range of motion. So that's why this is quite a complex exercise and it's quite hard to do. And then we would like to work eccentrically. So what that means is you are strengthening a muscle in its lengthened position. Okay. So usually we work a muscle, it contracts and shortens. This is where we're working it in a lengthened position. Okay. We need a lot of control for that. We need to work concentrically and eccentrically. So how that usually works is you can do calf raises. This is concentric, we're contracting. Eccentrically, you would go up and then you would lower down on one leg. Okay, so we're working it and strengthening it in a lengthened position. And then this over here is just movement for your Achilles tendon. So it's PNF. The name has lost proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. There we go. So that's a different type of stretch. It's not static stretching where you hold the stretch for 30 seconds. You're constantly moving. So you'll apply resistance by pushing into the towel or strap for 5 seconds, and then you pull and stretch for 10 seconds. And it can be quite effective, especially for the tendinopathy, just to provide a bit of movement. Okay, I think we're running out of time. So just briefly, pain has its place. But like the traffic light, we don't want you to go into getting even into the yellow section is a little bit dodgy. We don't want your body to go through too much pain, but we also need to load it where pain can vary. Okay, so we do want muscles to contract. We do want muscles to stretch. We don't want that sharp shooting, aching pain. But sometimes, we need to load in order to improve. But working according to this, red is a no-go zone, and this is all subjective, right? 10 being the worst pain you can experience, 0 being no pain at all. Okay, so it's very subjective according to what the person experiences, but we try and stay within the green zone, all right? So no pain, no gain, very, very much applicable in certain cases, not always in the final phase of rehab. Okay, and that's that from me. Thank you very much.
Are you the MC? Okay, I'll be the MC. Thanks, Tammy. Wow. Oh, oh, I'm used to saying everybody. So we're the Pilates side, the practical side. And I'd actually like you to take off your shoes. Take off one shoe. And if you, okay, so you've taken off the shoe and you can feel your feet against the floor. Okay, you can feel one's in your shoe. You can feel one's out of your shoe. That's the big word called proprioception. Okay, you know you've taken your shoe off, but you're getting a message back from the floor to say your shoe is off and it's cold. And now just with me. I'm going to take this off as well. We've perfumed the room. You're okay. And the floor is freezing. Okay, so that's not pain, that's negative sensation. If you have pain from the cold of the floor, please see a physio. If you cannot feel the floor, please see a physio. A magician. When we work footwork in Pilates, it's quite interesting because it ends up locked. Start off with breathing, and then you work through pelvic floor, rib cage, shoulders, where does your head go? And the footwork is something that you add at the very end as we level up. But most classes start standing, etc., etc. So you've been given a little ball. If you came in at the door, one of us would have gotten to you. I'd like to place it underneath your foot, and then I'm going to ask my associate Barbara to come up on stage. We're quite low. We have Barbara van der Bank on. That's so weird. It's gone. Right. So you're going to take a ball underneath your foot. We don't even have a ball. We get. I'm going to start telling you a story. Yeah. Okay. So do you want to stand? You can do it, Stephen.
Okay, you're going to start with the balls.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to start with the ball under the front of the foot, and you're going to curl your toes around the ball and stop it going from side to side. So you've seen all the lovely pictures of the foot. Think of your foot as like a ball of Play-Doh that you're basically rolling out. And when you do this roll on the ball, try to stay kind of in the 3 out of 10. Don't bruise your foot. If you push too much, you're going to feel bruised the next day. So we start with that. Then you can also, it doesn't work so well with a tennis ball, but with a rubber ball, you can actually place the ball under the big toe. You want the little bone behind the big toe on the floor, and then you can just gently lift and lower the heel. That mobilizes the toe.
That's it.
Okay. If you have a tennis ball and it's slipping out, you can put the tennis ball against the wall at home. Right. Then you're going to take the ball and roll from the big toe back to the heel. Right? So again, working within your range. If your foot is quite sensitive, keep it nice and light. If you feel fine, you can really go for it. And then you slowly work big toe, then go second toe, third toe, fourth toe, and then you go baby toe side of the foot, right? And then you can work your way back, right? And then we can also go to the heel, gently press down with the heel on the ball. And if you're a smoker, imagine you're stubbing out a cigarette butt. Right? And then you can do a little quick motion going backwards and forwards. That's just to wake up your foot a little bit. And now, once you've done that, I'd like you to stand up and just feel the difference in your 2 feet. So always nice to one side and not the other side. Close your eyes and feel what you feel underneath. Right? So after you've rolled your foot, you should be more aware of your toes. You should be more aware of the foot spreading out on the floor. And your brain should be more aware of the toes taking some weight. So that's what I wanted to say.
Back to me in the studio. If you want to do other sports, otherwise you might end up walking around in circles. But practical application of all this information is what we're aiming at. We're looking at a holistic way so that we take responsibility for our own health and starting it from the ground up. So if you've got a little ball at home or send a grandkid, go and get one of those 5 rand rubber balls. We've got packs at the back over there with toe socks and things like that. But do it for yourself and wake up from underneath and start moving consciously as well. And that's us for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting, well, the first of hosting meeting.
Yeah.
So it's something we used to do, I always say pre-COVID.
Pre-pandemic.
He's offered this love space. You haven't you? So thank you for hosting us. We really appreciate it. And I think, as you can see, it's quite nice that we we all have our own little areas to contribute towards any problems that are going on with the poor human body and all the strains that we put under that.
Yeah.
And
Don't stop using.
move.
Yeah.
And do you have any questions for any of us?
Arch that said, I'm going to leave, I'll come to the right. And I'm starting to get problems with my knee. Is it because of
That's
the arch
exactly
of
what
the
they were talking about, those little bodies with the lines and stuff. So if the arch on that foot is coming in, it's going to put more strain on that knee, exactly like you described.
If
Yes.
you aren't supporting the tube, will that actually start?
But we'll give it
moving muscles
support, but
quickly?
exactly what most people have said so far is you do need to learn to strengthen that arch. So yes, you can support it, it will get the knee back in alignment, but you're not resolving the issue. Was it weakness? We spoke about what comes first, chicken and egg. Is it the weakness that is the problem? Or is it arthritis? Maybe there's trauma that's been there before. So you need to look at the cause of the problem as well. And if it needs to be mobilizing the foot and ankle, and strengthening and an arch support, so you do need to assess it properly.
My last question.
So go ahead.
If you have a sagging arm, it cannot be caused by a problem in the leg.
Again, where do we start? Do we start